Okay, so I'm recording now, and so yeah, so you've watched the video, and so if you'll just go ahead and ask me the questions, I'll just go ahead and answer your questions, and then that will lead to other questions, and we'll just address all of your configuration questions and move forward.
Great. The first issue has to do with actually is generic topics. It has to do with the captive portal function.
Yes, uh-huh.
If we could go through it, and explain it a bit deeper, actually.
Okay, so let me just, what I'll do is I'll just do a recap of the captive portal, and then you can ask me some questions. So,
Okay.
the captive portal is a feature that allows you to basically require a user to enter a PIN code before he can access the internet.
Mm-hmm.
So it only works on one network, either the LAN or the Wi-Fi or whichever one you specify, and it's as simple as just clicking the Enable Captive Portal button and hitting save at the bottom of the screen to enable that. As soon as you do that, the captive portal is enabled, and any user trying to access the internet on port 80 will be presented with a login screen, and he will not be able to access the internet until he enters a valid PIN code. When he enters a valid PIN code, then the user will be allowed access to the internet, and any firewall rules that are open for that user will basically be applied to any of his traffic. So if you've got a firewall rule that says allow any user on the internet with any port, any destination, any protocol, then that user will have free access to the internet. Okay. So the PIN codes are get authenticated against a server. Now, if you go down here to this authentication method here where it says radius server, these are the two radius servers that are at our location on the internet to do the authentication. So what we do is we generate PIN codes for you and give those PIN codes to you, and then when that user enters those PIN codes are authenticated against one of these two servers on the internet. Traffic is sent every minute for every user that is logged into the captive portal, sending accounting information, and then that is tracked on the server, and when the user exceeds the limit of the PIN codes, that user will be basically expired and he will no longer be able to access the internet. So far so good?
Yeah.
Okay, so let me just show you what some of these PIN codes look like. First of all, if we go to, let me just show you our portal for generating the PIN codes. Let's see, Xgate. This is just on our servers, and this is what we use to generate the PIN codes. Okay, here we go.
Can I have access to this web portal, or is it from your side?
So this is on. So the answer is yes, maybe. This is a portal that we have that we use to generate the PIN codes. If you were to have your own PIN code server, then you would have your own portal and you would generate your own PIN codes. So right now, the way this works is you just send us a PO and we'll generate the PIN codes and then bill you for the PIN codes appropriately. So because we bill by the PIN code, we don't have a general portal. But I just wanted to go over this with you so that you see what the options are for generating the PIN codes. So a couple things that is nice about the PIN codes. One is that you can have the PIN codes be time-based or you can have them be data-based. So you can have PIN codes that will measure the number of hours or minutes that a user is online. So for example, you can generate a PIN code that's 2 hours long, for example, and that user will be able to access the internet for 2 hours and then he'll be logged off. Or you can generate a PIN code that gives a user a number of megabytes, like 50 megabytes or 100 megabytes or a gigabyte, and then he'll be able to use that much data and then be kicked off. So you've got the choice of what kind of PIN code it is, whether it's going to be using a timer or whether it's going to be using a data counter. Now,
can we have both?
You can have one or the other. You can't have both.
Okay.
Now, also, one of the things that you can do is you can control the speed of the pin code, which is very nice. So, for example, if you generate a data-based pin code that is 64 kbps, that user might have 100 megabytes or whatever you specify in the size, but he will never be able to use more than 64 kbps of bandwidth. So the maximum speed at which that user can download is regulated by the pin code. So you notice here that this is a data-based pin code running at 64 kbps. I can have a data pin code that has no limits that will allow the user to consume all of the bandwidth, or I can tailor or modify and say, for example, I want this user to have a 100 megabyte pin code, that runs at 96 kbps, and that's it. Finally,
can I ask you, Louis,
yes, go
on
ahead.
that?
Go ahead.
Okay, so until the moment we get to the point that we have our own pin code server, this means, for example, that we would send you by email the requirements in the email, saying, for example, that we need X number of pin codes at either, I don't know, let's say 64 kbps with 20 on 20 minutes or 100 megabytes, something like that.
That
right?
is correct. Yeah, you specify, and also you can specify the time of day you want that pin code active. So, for example, if you want the pin code only to work in the evenings, then you can specify the times and GMT that you want that pin code to be active, and we can specify that. And finally, you can tell us whether that pin code is allowed to move between ships. So, for example, we can generate a pin code that only works on a specific vessel and can't be used on any other vessel, or we can have the pin codes open so that the user can migrate from vessel to vessel and use the same pin code until it runs out.
That's great. And about the values and the values of the pin code generator, is it do we have them somewhere, or can you send them over by print screen so that we know?
Yeah. So pretty much anything. So pretty much any value. Yeah, they're in the price list. Any value up to 100 megabytes in quantities of 1 megabyte, and then after that, I think is 500 megabytes, 1 gigabyte, 2 gigabytes, and 5 gigabytes, or something like that. I can't remember exactly, but you can specify that, and there's a price list associated with that. Of course, if you have your own pin code server, then we can make the limits whatever you want, and you wouldn't be limited by our particular limits. So if you have your pin code server, also we can make changes to this, because you'll have your own radius server, and we can change the business rules that are used for the authentication. But for now, since you're starting small, you can just send us a PO for the number of pin codes that you want, and then we'll just generate the pin codes. Now, if you've got a vessel that has the unlimited pin code option, that's a monthly, it costs you $300 a month for unlimited pin codes, then you can just tell us the name of the vessel and what kinds of pin codes you want, and then we'll just generate the pin codes for you and send them to you. Since it's a fixed monthly rate, then there's no per pin code charge, and we can send you 1,000 of them or however many you want, and you can just put them in inventory.
Okay, that's good.
All right. So now once the user has the pin code, he puts it into the captive portal, and he logs in, and then the system keeps track of the pin code. Now I'm just going to show you kind of what the CDRs look like for the pin codes. So let me go get a pin code for an active user. Just give me half a second here. Radius. I'm just looking up a pin code for an active user. Okay, so here is a pin code user right here. So if you notice that under the captive portal, there's a CDR tab, and you can enter a pin code, and you can do this on the vessel, or you can do this from shore, and you can hit submit, and basically that will generate a CDR for that particular pin code. So this particular pin code is a data pin code, and it's running at 64 kbps. It's got a 100 megabyte limit. The user has used 101 megabytes, so he's almost done with it. He's used this much time in seconds, and here's his session. So he's logged in 6 times. Each one of the sessions lasted for X number of seconds. This is the number of bytes that he transmitted during that session for a total of number of bytes. So it hasn't expired yet, but it's about to expire. Okay?
Yep.
All right. So now, since all of your systems are going to be VSAT based, I suggest that you just use the radius server, our radius server, to do the authentication. I just quickly mentioned that there is a possibility of running the radius server on the router itself. There's some advantages to that. One of them, if you've got fleet broadband or Iridium open port where the bandwidth is expensive, then you don't want the authentication traffic to be going over the network, because the ship pays for that, not the user. And so you can reduce the overhead required by the captive portal by just going over here, captive portal, and changing the radius server to local host, and then just using the radius server that's on the local host. But for your configurations, I really don't think that you'll be needing to do that, because you're going to be running on VSAT and there's plenty of bandwidth there, and so there's no need to account for the UDP packets that are being sent for doing the authentication. Okay, go ahead.
All right. The next question actually is regarding VoIP.
Yes.
And, we can go through, anything you'd like to inform me on it, because I have experience on Cisco routers.
Yes.
And not so much on VoIP, just routing functions.
So the VoIP system is pretty easy. It depends on if you just want to use the analog lines, or if you're going to be using SIP extensions. Do you know if you're going to be using SIP extensions, or are you going to be using the analog lines?
The SIP extensions, and then what's the other one?
The analog lines, just regular, ordinary telephone lines that get plugged into the RJ11 jacks.
I think it will be SIP extensions. But we're not sure yet, because all these issues are pending issues for the pending project.
Okay.
If we win it.
So the SIP extensions are nice. I like the SIP extensions better because they give you more flexibility, because you can add telephones anywhere you've got Ethernet connectivity, right? Now, even if you have analog lines, you can still use SIP extensions by using something like a Cisco PAP-T or ATA.
Okay.
Amazon.com, Cisco PAP-T. Yeah, so you see this PAP-T right here, this guy right here? This little device for $40 will allow you to hook up 2 analog phones, 2 regular ordinary phones, to an Ethernet network using SIP. So there's really no need to buy the routers with analog ports, unless the user has to have them for some reason and doesn't want to use one of these PAP-T, or doesn't have an Ethernet connection on the vessel. So our recommendation is that if you have an analog phone requirement, to use the PAP-Ts if you've got an Ethernet. Save yourself the cost on the difference in the router, and get better performance. Also, SIP phones. There is many different SIP phones available. So, for example, so you've got Cisco SIP phones. You've got Grandstream SIP phones. Grandstream. I haven't actually used the Grandstream SIP phones, but some of our customers have, and they say they work well, and they're quite inexpensive at $60. And we use SNOM 300s here in the office, and so these are nice phones as well for $90. So pretty much any SIP phone that you choose is going to work. So you just need to select one that you want to use, and then just buy a pile of them. All right, so let me just go through setting up a SIP extension for you so that you understand how this works.
Okay.
So first of all, you need to log into the system, and there's a quick start guide that gets sent with the router that gives you how to log in. But basically, the username is superadmin and the password is admin. The very first thing you're going to need to do is you're going to need to go to System Activations, and you're going to have to activate the unit. I haven't done this yet, but later this afternoon I'm going to send you a key that looks just like the one that I've got listed here that will be for your particular router. If you look at yours right now, yours just has a window that says enter a key, and you will not be able to use the VoIP until you enter the key. So I will send you the key, and then you will activate the unit. Okay. As soon as you activate the unit, you're going to see several things. You're going to see this decoder status come up. And there's a couple things to note here. One is this serial number. For my router is 21283. You need to make note of that. That is an important number. And then you need to make sure that you've got a status of OK, which will basically tell you that the decoder is communicating with the VoIP provider and that there is internet connectivity between the decoder or the PBX and the VoIP provider. If you've got an error status here, then the system is just not going to work, and we need to figure out what networking issues you've got in order to be able to get this issue resolved. But if you just have the router connected directly to a VSAT, and at the NOC there's no firewall filtering, then you shouldn't have any problems registering with the VoIP provider. This delay will basically tell you the delay on the link, which should be about 600 milliseconds for VSAT. It'll be about 1.4 seconds for Fleet Broadband. All right.
Can you
go ahead?
That's the delay, of the delay of.
That's the delay of the link.
Okay. Can you say again the number, the values, please?
So for VSAT, you're going to have 600 milliseconds.
Okay.
And for Fleet Broadband, you'll have 1.4 seconds. So when you talk on the VoIP system, there's going to be a delay. I mean, you'll be speaking and then you'll stop, and then before the other person's voice starts coming in, there's going to be a delay. For VSAT, that's going to be 600 milliseconds. For Fleet Broadband, that's going to be 1.5 seconds.
Okay.
So for VSAT, it's not too bad. For Fleet Broadband, it's a little annoying. It takes a little to getting used to because there's such a long delay there. But people get used to it and they use it. So just be aware that that's going to be the delay of the link. All right. Now, listed below that, you'll find your analog lines. These are the RJ45s that are on the router itself. So on the 513, which is what you purchased, there's 4 analog lines. On the 500, there's no analog lines. So if you're going to be using SIP extensions, then you can just buy wXa 500s. They're a lot less expensive. They're under $2,000. And that will get you the PBX without the analog lines, which you're not going to use anyway because you're going to use SIP extensions. However, for the one you've got there's 4 analog lines, and you'll see 4, they're listed and labeled A1, A2, A3, and A4, and that's the label on the front of the box. And you'll note your DID, your phone number. Now we will ship you, when we ship you this activation key, we will also ship you the serial number for the unit, the VoIP serial number, and we'll also send you the DID for the unit itself. So you'll have those 3 pieces of information when you activate the unit. So here's the caller name and the caller ID, and then you can also set these to be crew lines or not crew lines. And so you'll set the line to be either crew line or not, and then you'll come down to the bottom and you hit save. Note that after you do the activation, it's important to come down to the bottom of the page and hit the save button, or the PBX won't take all the parameters and set itself up correctly. And so a common mistake is to activate the unit and then never come down to the bottom of the page and hit save. You need to do that. Okay. Once you do that, the unit is ready to go. You can plug a phone directly into the back of into one of the ports A1 through A4, and you can make a phone call. and you can receive a phone call. So you're done. It's as simple as that. You're now ready to deploy, and 95% of our vessels do exactly that and nothing more. Now there's some customization that you can do, and I'll go over that quickly. You got to create SIP extensions if you want to do SIP extensions, and then of course there's other things that you might want to do to modify the behavior of the PBX and how it handles the calls. By default, you have one phone number. That phone number will serve the vessel, and you can have as many as 8 inbound calls or 8 outbound calls, or any combination of those calls on this one DID. So you can have 8 people call this DID at the same time and make phone calls into the vessel. Or you can have 8 people make 8 calls out, or so forth. So you're limited to a maximum of 8 concurrent calls per PBX.
No matter if it is VSAT or Inmarsat, etc., etc.
It doesn't matter. The problem is not with the bandwidth. The problem is with the processor speed for the PBX. Each line is 6 kilobits per second. So a total of 8 lines is 48 kilobits per second. On VSAT and on Fleet Broadband, you have much more than that. So you could have more than 8 calls happening at the same time. The problem is that the compression is so heavy that the processor in the router is unable to compress more than 8 concurrent calls at the same time, and the call quality starts to degrade after 8 concurrent calls. So what we do is we limit the calls to 8 so that the user doesn't experience call degradation. If you want to have more than 8 concurrent calls, then what you need to do is you need to buy another wXa-400 or 404 or 408 and just have more than one box on the network. Every box can do a total of 8 concurrent calls. So if you need 16 concurrent calls, then you buy 2 wXa-400s. All right, and you can have as many as you want. Now you can have as many SIP extensions on the vessel, and those SIP extensions can call each other, and there's no limit there because they're not using compression to communicate between each other. And so you can have 100 people talking to each other on the vessel without any degradation in performance. It's only the links that are going over it's only the calls that are going over the satellite link that are problematic.
If we have 8 active users talking over satellite, if a new one wants to call, does he get a message?
Yeah, it'll just be busy. It'll be unavailable. He'll get an unavailable message.
All right.
And then he'll just have to wait. Now, having 8 concurrent calls is quite unlikely. So, you know, we have cruise ships with 120 passengers and 40 crew, and the limit of 8 calls is rarely met. And the reason for that is because they're paying, on average, retail 30 cents per minute per call. So the calls are usually fairly short. The average call for us is 7 minutes. Actually, the average call for us is 5 minutes, which is 2 minutes larger than the industry. The industry average for any satellite system is 3 minutes. For us, it's 5 minutes. So at any given time, on average, you don't have anyone doing an outside call for more than 5 minutes. And so the probability of having 8 calls happening at the same time is fairly unlikely because there's usually quite a bit of availability. All right? Because you got to keep in mind that if that crew member is spending 30 cents, then a 5-minute call is going to be, you know, over $1. So it'll be expensive for him. It'll be $1. It'll be $1.50. So he's not going to talk a long time on that phone because he's going to want to save his minutes.
Can I ask you a question, Louis?
Sure.
Let's say that on board the vessel there are, let's say, 3 or 4 concurrent users.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, there are SIP extensions locally on board the vessel.
That is correct.
So, can with this feature, can we have concurrent calls
On the vessel? Yes.
to the outside world, and at the same time onboard members to communicate with each other?
Absolutely, and there's no limit to the number of in-vessel communications that you can have. You could have 100 people talking to each other at the same time without any issue.
Okay, that's great.
And the reason for that is because there's no compression, right? They're just using ULAW, so you can have as many SIP calls as you want. So one thing that you can do, for example, is each crew member can have an iPhone or an Android phone running a soft phone, and they can have an extension. And it could be a prepaid extension. So when they call out over the link, they have to put in a PIN code, but they can call each other for free. So instead of using VHF radios, the captain can just dial extension 201 to get a hold of the purser, for example.
Okay, sorry, 1 second, please.
Just 1 second, please.
Thank you. Nick, we have a very short break. We just go to the toilet. Can you please say again, Louis, about the example with the iPhones and Android on board?
So what you can do is you can every crew member can have either an Android phone or an iPhone.
Okay.
And they can run a soft phone on that Android phone, which we can provide you for free. Okay. And they can have a registered extension.
What do you mean by a registered extension on board?
For example, it's just like a telephone in your office. My extension here at my office is extension 201.
Okay.
So I can have an iPhone and my extension can be 201. So a crew member on the ship wanting to call me just dials 201 and my phone will ring.
Your iPhone or your Android phone will ring?
Yes, will ring, and I'll just answer it just like if it were a regular telephone call and I'm talking to another crew member on the vessel that has another Android phone or a regular telephone that is at extension 205.
That's fantastic. And those extensions have to be mapped to the VoIP to the 513 router, right?
That is correct, and I'll show you how to do that. You have to create those extensions on the router, and then you have to tell the iPhone that that is his extension. So every extension has a number, 201, 202, 1105, I mean whatever you want, some number. It has a password, and that's it. So with those two things, any user knowing the IP address of the router can register his product. So we have free SIP clients that you can download. We have an Android one and we have an iOS one. It takes 3 parameters to configure it: an extension, a password, and an IP address. And let me just show you how to get to that. So if I go to play.google.com, which is the Android marketplace, and I just search for Xgate phone. Xgate. Let me just search for Xgate. Actually, okay. So here's Xgate. Here it is right here. Xgate satellite voice. All right. So you can just install that on your Android phone and use it with a WXA 513, no problem.
So this application is your application.
That is correct.
It's the Xgate.
Yes, it's the Xgate.
Xgate. So you have.
Yes.
You have Xgate for iPhone and Android.
Yes.
So can I ask you another very important question on this?
Sure.
On the ships, as you know, many times there are visitors like auditors or office crew members, etc., etc. Does that mean that, let's say, I'm an office employee of Chacos shipping, okay, and I want to go to my vessel for a few days, and I have either an iPhone or an Android?
Yes.
Does that mean that that the system administrator can assign me with an extension so that I can have within the vessel communication?
Yes. Not only that, but when he assigns the extension, he can say it's a crew extension or it's a postpaid extension. So if it's a postpaid extension, when that user makes a phone call through his Android, it just goes through, doesn't ask for a PIN code, it goes on to CDRs, the bill gets the ship gets billed monthly for that usage. If it's a crew extension, then he'll be asked for a PIN code, and he has to have a PIN code that you sell him in order to use it.
So that's great. So in other words, they can use their own phones.
That is correct.
Not only to communicate internally, but also to make outgoing calls.
That is correct. Yes.
Okay.
And they can download this application. It's called Xgate Satellite Voice, and they can download it from the Android store. And the one for iOS it's been submitted. It hasn't been accepted yet, but in the next week or so, you'll have the one for iOS as well. All right.
That's good. Thank you very much.
Okay. So now, when the vessel is called, when you pick up the phone and you call the vessel at this phone number, currently what you get is the message which says, "Please enter the extension for the user you want to access." So when you assign an extension to someone who's visiting the vessel, you might give them extension 351, for example. When someone dials the PBX and they enter extension 351, it'll go ahead and it'll send them to their extension, and their extension will ring and they'll answer the phone. So the PBX has an auto attendant, which you can program. The default auto attendant just accepts the extension number for the user and then transfers the call over to the user. All inbound calls are postpaid. There is no prepaid. There is no prepaid or crew calling inbound calls. Only outbound calls for PIN codes and crew calling.
Okay.
All right. Okay. So to set the crew calling or postpaid calling on the analog lines is very easy. All you need to do is basically select true or false here and then hit save at the bottom of the screen. For the SIP extensions, it's a little trickier, and I will show you how to do that in a minute. But that's where this number comes in, the serial number, and where this number comes in. So here's the rule. If the caller ID for an extension is the DID, or the phone number, then it's a postpaid extension. If, however, the caller ID for the phone is this serial number, then it's a prepaid crew calling line. That's how we determine whether an extension is prepaid or postpaid, by the caller ID. And if the caller ID is 21283 on my system, then it's a crew calling line. If the caller ID is 1-832-730-4720, then it's a postpaid line. All right? Okay. So, accounts. So let's go talk about extensions. Before I talk about extensions, let me talk about users. Every user on the system can have a username and a password to log into the system. Every extension can be assigned one or more users. If a user has been assigned to an extension, then when that user logs in with his username and his password, he can look at all of his CDRs. That's important because if you've got a user with a prepaid card and the user says, "Oh, I didn't use all of my minutes, but the card has been expired," he can log in with his username and password and see his CDRs and see that he did use all those minutes. Also, the system has voicemail. So if the user logs in with his username and password and he's been assigned to an extension, then he can log in and view and listen to his voicemail over the web. He can also do it over the phone, but he can also do it over the web. Users are easy to create. I've created a sample here, and so if you you can just go ahead and this example, mine, Luis Soltero, is on your system. You can just go ahead and create one, and you'll notice that basically you've got a username, you've got a password, and then you've got some other information which is not necessary. If the user has email, you can enter the email address, and you can actually have the voicemail emailed to the user so that he receives his voicemail as an email attachment. Okay, extensions. Here is where you define the extensions. By default, you have 4 extensions that are defined, which are the analog ports. Do not modify these. I would just leave this alone. So 1011 is the extension for port A1 on your 513. A2 is 102, and so forth and so on. So those are reserved. I would not use 101 through 108 for anything because those are reserved for the system, for the analog ports, for the 400 and the 408, and for the 513. However, any other extension, 3 digits to 5 digits, is fair game for a SIP extension. I have created a SIP extension for you as an example, which is a totally functioning SIP extension, 1001, and I've assigned it to the El Soltero user. Let's go ahead and take a look at that extension. When you go to create a new extension, you can just hit the little plus sign right here, just like we do with all of our table editing functions in the router, and that will allow you to add a particular user. I've already got a user here, so I'm just going to edit this particular user. When you're creating a new extension, you assign that extension a number. In this case, 1001. That extension can be 3 digits, 4 digits, or 5 digits, and it can be anything you want. So you can make up the extensions. So for example, transient crew might be 300 something. Local crew might be 100 something. The captain might be 20. I mean, you have total reign on what those digits can be. You then assign a password. If you want to assign a user to that extension, you would just basically select them from the list, having already added them under the user manager function. In this particular case, El Soltero has been added to this particular extension. So when I log in as El Soltero, I will see the CDRs for all the calls that were made and received to extension 1001. All right?
Yep.
Okay. Those are the 3 things that you need to create the extension. You have voicemail. You can assign the user a voicemail password. Okay, an account code, usually the same as the extension, and then this is where you get to the caller IDs. Now, the caller ID and the caller name is used locally. So when I call another user on the ship, this effective caller ID and caller number will show up on the user's phone. So when I call, so if my caller ID name is Captain and I call extension 201, 201 will see that that call is coming from the captain. The outbound caller ID and name is what's used to identify whether this is a postpaid account or a prepaid account. So here is where you would enter the DID or enter the 5-digit serial number for the unit. Now, if you're setting up 100 extensions, it's kind of a drag to have to go in there and put in the caller ID for every extension that you can. So you have the ability to use a global variable to define these extensions. So by default, the global variable is called outbound caller name and outbound caller ID. Let me go show you how you set those. So for example, if you want all of your extensions by default to be postpaid, when you create them, then you can define these outbound caller names and caller IDs to be the 5-digit serial number for the unit, and then whenever you create a new extension, by default, it will be a prepaid extension. Okay?
Yep.
Those variables are created under System, Variables, and you'll see them right here under Outbound Caller ID and Outbound Caller Name. In yours, you will see that this says, please enter a value. I've already done that for this one because I've activated this unit and I've been using it for training. But to change it, you would just come in here and you would change the value. For me, I've defined all my extensions by default to be postpaid, and consequently I just put in my DID there. However, if I'd come in here and put in 2183, let's see, 21583, which is my serial number, and hit save, then by default all of my extensions will be prepaid. And so again, you would just set the accounts, come down here, and then hit save to save that value. So again, those two values are sitting under variables. The very first variables are outbound caller ID, outbound caller name. You need to set those in order to have prepaid or postpaid. Okay, getting back to our accounts and our extensions. Okay, so we were looking at these extension values here. Here's our outbound caller ID name and our outbound caller thing. This, you know what these mean now. The rest of it is not important. Here's voicemail to email. If the user has an email account, you can put in his email there, and true to attach email file. Any voicemail that comes for that user will be automatically emailed to that particular user. And you can put in a comment and enable it and hit save. Once you do that, you have created the SIP account for the user. All right, and you can create as many as you want. There is no limit. So every user on the vessel can have an extension, or should have an extension, if he's got a phone. Otherwise, every telephone on the ship is going to have an extension. All right. Okay. So how do you use the SIP extensions? Well, you use a soft phone. So you can use a soft phone on a PC, on a Mac, or on any of your mobile phones. By default, we've created two soft phones for you for the Android and for iPhone, just to make it simple for the users, because only 3 things are required in order to register with the PBX. They are the extension number, the password, so the extension number, the password, in this case 1001 and 1001 for this particular user, and the IP address of the router. With those 3 parameters, you can register a SIP extension. Now, most soft phones that are on the marketplace have many more options, and so they'll confuse the users. And so consequently, we created our own soft phones with only those 3 parameters so that the user could enter those parameters easily without confusion. However, I'm now going to demonstrate the use of xLite, which is a soft phone which is available for free that runs on Macintosh and on Windows, which you can download. Just Google xLite phone and you will find it. xLite.
The only application that can do that?
No, you can use any application. You can use, there's a million of them out there. Any SIP soft phone will work. I'm just going to demonstrate this one because this is the one that is in the manual. It's free and you can download it and use it at no cost, but there's probably 100 different soft phones out there that you can use. So this is just for demonstration. Go ahead.
I'm using Bria on my iPhone, and on the iPad it's an excellent application. It's a paid one, but the xLite is also excellent.
This is Bria. Okay, you notice that this is Bria. All right, but the xLite version from Bria for Mac and Windows is free.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Now Bria will work fine on the iPhone too. You just need to set it up, and you'll notice that there's a ton of parameters that need to be set up. So when you go to accounts, for example, so here's the SIP configuration account. So you've got the user ID, you've got a domain. Well, the domain is not really used for anything. You have the password, and then you have the IP address, and in my case, it's 96. So let me go back here to my 96. So it's 96 is the IP address of the router. So again, you've got a username, you've got a password, you have to enter some domain, but it doesn't matter what you enter there. Authorization name, this is actually the name that is used to authenticate the user, and you hit OK, and voila, that should go ahead and register and give me green light, and there it is. I got a green light. I can now make a phone call through this SIP extension by just going ahead and dialing, and off I go. I'm actually making a phone call. It's ringing. I don't know if you can hear that or not. Probably not, but I can hear it in my headphones. And I just made a call to our office phone, and I heard Cheryl's voice on our auto attendant. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Pretty straightforward and simple.
Indeed.
Any questions on SIP extensions?
No, everything is understood.
Okay.
Go on.
All right. So, dial plans. Have you done much with VoIP, with PBXs at all? Have you ever configured PBXs before?
No.
Okay. So PBXs can be as simple or as complicated as you could possibly want to make them. They're totally programmable, and the program is called dial plans. So when someone talks about a dial plan, they're talking about the way you program a PBX use. There's many options that you can use. So we have some simple dial plans set up for you, and those dial plans basically say when a user dials in through any phone number inbound, just go ahead and send that to the auto attendant. However, you can change that. You can say, for example, that when someone dials a ship phone number, the call should be automatically routed to the captain's extension and to no one else. And only the captain's extension rings. And there is no auto attendant. Or you can say, for example, when someone calls a ship, then all the phones should ring. So you've got different business requirements for each different ship, and you can tailor the PBX for those requirements. Creating dial plans can be fairly complex, and I'm not going to cover creating dial plans here. I'm just going to show you a couple of real simple examples that are issued with the web accelerator so that you can make some basic simple configurations and changes to those routes. So before I get too far into this, I want to make a reference to two books. The PBX that we're using is based on an open source project called FreeSwitch. FreeSwitch is one of the most popular PBXs on the planet. It has hundreds of thousands of installations. There is a very nice book called, I'm going back to Amazon. It's called FreeSwitch. FreeSwitch. There it is. Okay, it's called FreeSwitch 1.06. FreeSwitch 1.06 is the PBX that is running on the wXa. This book is the reference for FreeSwitch. So if you want to do something more complicated than what I'm going to explain here, then I suggest you buy this book, because you need to understand how to program FreeSwitch to do anything more complicated than what we're doing with this PBX. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so back to the PBX. All right. So I'm under dial plan. Dial plan is the programming for the unit. It explains how the different phones are going to interact and how calls are routed between the different extensions and the outbound calls. So you have inbound routes and you have outbound routes. Okay? So outbound routes control how we do postpaid accounts or how do we do prepaid accounts. I really wouldn't mess with the outbound routes because I don't see in a situation where you need to control outbound routes. But for example, if you wanted a specific extension not to be able to dial at all, then you would basically create an outbound rule for that particular extension so that when that user tried to make an outbound call, he just couldn't do that. Right now we have, pardon me?
Firewall.
It's kind of like a firewall, kind of, but for voice calls. Yes, And so you can say, for example, do not allow any extension that starts with the number 3 to make outbound calls. So right now, all outbound calls are allowed if the user is a PIN code user or if a user is a postpaid user. And so these are the rules that are used, and these are the rules that are actually looking at the caller ID to make the calls. And this is the rule that says if the caller ID is the one for the unit, then allow it as a postpaid, or if the caller ID is a PIN code, then allow it as a PIN code user. And so it changes, it controls It controls how the outbound calls are done. The inbound routes control how the inbound calls are routed in the PBX. So we have several, I've created several inbound routes for you, and the one that's enabled by default is the welcome IVR. So by default, when the user calls the PBX will answer with this welcome message and say, hello, enter the extension that you want to reach. And it'll just do that 3 times, and then it'll hang up if the end user hasn't entered a valid extension, or if the user basically doesn't enter anything. It'll eventually just time out and then just hang up the line. However, there's a couple more rules in here. For example, there's a rule for each one of the analog ports on the unit, and if you disable the IVR and you enable line 1, for example, that says, hey, when somebody calls the PBX, just route them to line 1, or line 2, or line 3, or line 4. And then finally, we have one here, which is a hunt group, which means that if you enable this one, it'll go through and it'll ring line 1, line 2, line 3, line 4 until somebody answers one of those lines. So those are 4 different inbound scenarios that are used. And so let's just go take a look at one. Let's just take a look at this one right here, which is one that you might want to say, hey, if someone calls, I want to just route it to the captain. So this is the extension. It's got a name. It's disabled right now, and it's got a description. And down here, do you see these 3 lines where it says condition, condition, action? That is the free switch programming language that actually routes the call. So the first one just defines the context for the call. The second one says, hey, if anybody calls from outside using any phone number that this condition is matched, then what it does is it does a transfer action and transfers to extension 1001. All right? Okay. So let's take a look at this real quick. I'm just going to a little bit of this is a Unix regular expression. This matches the inbound did. So I'm sorry, it matches the did for the unit. It matches the phone number for the unit, or the number that was actually dialed. So this says that if the end user, the guy on LAN, dialed anything which has any characters any number of times, then match this rule. Now, you can change that to the did for the unit. So let's say, for example, that you assign 2 dids to the PBX. So you've got a Houston number, you've got 2 Houston numbers, or if you've got a number in Houston, you've got a number in Greece, for example. The unit has 2 phone numbers, and you can dial either phone number and it'll get you to the ship. What you want to do is, if you dial the Houston number, you want it to go to the PBX and have the welcome message. However, when you dial the Greek number, you want it to go to the captain's extension, which is 1001. What you can do is you can edit this and actually change the $* for the did, for the phone number that was actually dialed. And then when someone dials that number, it will match this rule and send it over to the captain's line and not to the PBX. So you can have any number of phone numbers assigned to the unit, more than 1, and so forth. So I'm going to let you read about that, but basically the message I want to get across here is that you can program inbound calls by which phone number was dialed, or a number of different conditions, and you can execute a number of different actions based on what matches that particular inbound call.
Okay.
Okay, let me go back to the inbound routes, and let's take a look at the IVR, because the IVR is the one that you're currently using. This basically says, okay, any phone number being dialed, fantastic, answer the phone, sleep for 2 seconds, and then send it to the welcome message. One of the things that you probably want to do is change the welcome message, right? Right now it says enter an extension. However, there are several things you want to do. You might want to say, welcome to vessel Silver Queen. Enter 1 for the captain, enter 2 for the engineer, or enter the extension of a crew member. So you may want to have a message like that, just like we have here in our office. And so you might want to change the way you may want to change the message, and you may want to change the way the programming is done based on what the message states. So let me show you how to do that. So basically, we want to change the welcome IVR. So this is the rule set that says when inbound calls come, just send it to the welcome IVR. We need to go edit the welcome IVR. If you go to apps, all right, and you go to IVR menu, you will see that we have an IVR menu defined, which is the welcome wXa, which is the message that is being called when the inbound call isn't. So let's edit it and take a look at that. First of all, we have a greeting, okay? This is a message. Well, maybe we may want to change the message. Well, here are all the standard messages that come with the unit, but you want to probably record your own message. So I'll show you how to do that in a minute. You also have a short one, which is the one that gets displayed after the first one. So when you call the PBX, you get the long one, and if the user messes up, then he gets displayed the short one. So you've got two greeting messages, one long one, one short one. You probably want to change those. You have a number of timeouts to wait for after the meeting, and then you can enable direct dial, which allows you to enter the extension directly. If you've got this disabled, then only the menu can be executed, 1, 2, 3, 4, or whatever you specify. And so you might want to change the menu. Going down here, you've got the ability to set who gets called when a destination is selected. So for example, you can say when 1 is hit, then dial extension 1001, right? So that way the voice message can say, welcome to Silver Star, enter 1 for the captain. Well, here's how you map the number 1 to the captain phone. All right? And then you say 1 is captain. And then hit save. Now you've defined a menu option. Now you've got to record it. You've got to say, you've got to actually get on the microphone or call the PBX and say, enter 1 for the captain. Otherwise, this is going to be meaningless and the user won't know what extension to option. But this is how you program the different digits and what extension they go to when you press them. Okay? You notice that right now we have none. We have none. So all we do is we say the greeting, and then we have the direct dial enabled so that they can enter the extension for the number for the extension that they want to reach. Okay? Any questions so far?
No.
Okay, so the question is, how do we record the messages? Well, there's 2 ways to do it. One, you can go to recordings, and then you can just upload a WAV file, right? And give it a name. So if you just click on plus here, I'm sorry, you can just go ahead and upload a file, choose a file, and then upload it, and then you can actually, it shows up in the list, and then you can actually edit it and name it. I'm going to let you play with that. Alternately, you can actually call this extension on a regular phone, and you can record the message. As soon as you do that, it'll show up here. You can change its name, and you'll see how long it is and the size and so forth. So there's 2 different ways to get messages on the system. You can just record it on a microphone on your PC and then just upload it, or you can just dial extension *732 and record the message. All right?
Okay.
Actually, if I go over here to my accounts, let me go to extensions. So to go to my dial plan, I will see that there is a recording. Actually, this is the extension number for the recording, *732673. That's in the manual anyway. So if you look at the manual, it'll show you how to do this. You dial that extension, it'll record your message. When you go back to apps, that message will show up right here under recordings. You can then change the name of the recording, And then when you go down to IVR menu and you edit this IVR menu and you click on greeting long, you will see the recordings listed under recordings and you can select it. Okay?
Okay.
So that's all described in the manual. I'm going to let you play with that. But that's about the only function that I see you modifying for the end user, because really their requirements on the ships are going to be pretty straightforward. That's all we've ever done on any of our ships, is change the recording and then put in a menu so that they can easily get to this extension without having to know the extension number. All right?
Great. Yeah.
Okay. Let me just go over a couple more things here. If you click on apps, by default, the system administrator gets to see all the CDRs. There they are. The CDR will show you the caller ID name, the number called, which extension made the call, which number was called, the duration of the call, and so forth. And so you've got CDRs for every call that's been made on the to and from the vessel. These CDRs are not used for billing. They're for FYI only, for the manager on the vessel. And also, like I mentioned before, if a crew member logs in with his username and password, he'll only see the CDRs for his extension, and so he can verify that indeed he's getting the number of minutes that he thinks he's getting on his prepaid cards, or he can get a call record of the calls that he has made. Of course, you can search and so forth, and so anybody wanting to track usage on the vessel. So for example, say a vessel doesn't want to have prepaid, they just want to have postpaid, and then at the end of the month they just want to download this in an Excel spreadsheet format and then just run a report so that they can build each individual user independently. Well, they can certainly do that. We will be sending you CDRs at the end of the month for all postpaid accounts. We won't be sending you the ones for prepaid unless you request them, but we'll be sending you CDRs at the end of the month for postpaid accounts, because we will be billing you for the postpaid accounts. So you'll need to take those CDRs and you need to put them into your billing system so that you can bill the ship for that particular usage. All right?
And Louis, can I ask you something on this? Anytime the vessel, let's say within a month, that the management of the company wants to know what is the traffic generated on the for the post
Yes.
paid traffic,
Yes.
and they come to us and say, hey, we need to know, for example, until today, how many, what is the traffic, the outbound traffic. I guess we run a report within the router directly, and we get this.
Yeah, you can log into the router directly, or we have a web portal that allows you to put in like a PIN code and show you CDRs for PIN codes on the web. But the best, fastest way to get the CDRs is to just log into the vessel and get them from here. Otherwise, it's going to take a day or 2 or 3 for us to get the CDRs to you, because we have to look into the system and generate a report and send you that report.
Sure. Okay.
Right now, like I say, so you'll have remote access to this. The administrators at the company will have remote access, and so they really should never have to call you for CDRs, because you'll train their administrator to log in to this web portal and generate their own CDRs. Okay?
Yep.
That's it. That's all I'm going to tell you about the PBX. It's all very well. It's very detailed. It's documented very well in the VoIP manual. So take a look at the VoIP manual and then just play with it. I really don't think you're going to have any issues with it. It's pretty straightforward. Really, I think the only thing that you're going to be doing is activating them and then maybe changing the messages and then just letting the user run. You might have some kind of special requirement, but I haven't seen it. You know, in all of our vessels, they basically run with the basic configuration. They either modify the message, and most of them they don't even do that. They just they just keep the standard one. So creating extensions is about the only thing that you'll be doing, and you'll be teaching them how to create extensions so that they can create their own extensions. So maintenance on your side should be pretty minimal.
All right. From my side, I don't think I have any more questions. I don't know if George.
Okay. The only thing I want to be clear, you're a Cisco engineer. I just want to show you one difference when you're generating the firewall rules that will be different. That is considerably different than Cisco programming. Okay.
Okay.
When you look at the firewall rules, you'll have a tab for each one of the inbound, for each one of the Ethernet ports. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The traffic only gets filtered going into the router.
Yeah, I remember that.
Okay, that's important to know. So you create rules that are inbound. There is no filtering of outbound traffic. Only inbound traffic. Okay? So just keep that in mind. And then the other thing is first come, first serve. So as soon as you match a rule, you will stop and you will not continue. So you want to make sure that you actually, this is not the way most people run. Most people run with either no rules or a block rule, which is a block all, and then they add pass rules to allow users in for the specific rule or the specific route that they want. Okay, so that's the only major big difference between philosophy of firewall between this and Cisco. Otherwise, I think we went over this pretty clearly in the video that I made for you. And if you've got any questions, just shoot me an email. But quick experimentation will show you that this is pretty straightforward and simple to use.
Okay.
Okay, and then and then it's important to understand how the PPTP VPN works. You got any questions on that?
No, actually, I don't.
Okay. Yeah, because this will just allow you to easily connect to their internal network to do IT support. So they're going to want to be able to do this. I would do this versus IPsec. The PPTP is so much simpler than IPsec.
Yeah, it's recommended.
Yeah. Okay.
Can I ask you a question, Louis?
Sure.
Let's say that as with the customer we did the web expo around 3 weeks ago. Let's say they decide to go, for each of their 2 vessels to have 513 route wXa 513 router, right?
Yes.
And within their office here in Greece,
Yes.
at the headquarters, for cost reasons, they do not want to go over to procure,
Yes, yeah.
a same router.
Yep.
But they want to use one of the routers they have in order to to maximize the value. So the only thing they need to do is to go to get over the PPTP and log on anytime from the office to the vessel, in order from their router on the office to log on to the 513 router on the vessel in order to see as if it were in the vessel. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, I mean, I gave you demonstrations. You remember when we had the customer online?
Yes.
We logged into the vessel. Yeah, if you use PPTP, the computer that's using the PPTP client will be on the same network as the entire ship network. So you'll be able to ping all their phones. You'll be able to configure their SIP phones, for example. You can configure their SIP phones remotely using PPTP. You can go to the VSAT controller website and you can make changes to the VSAT controller website. You can log into a mail server that they might have on board and make configuration changes. I mean, you are literally on the vessel. There's no difference between a PPTP client and somebody that's on the vessel with a PC connected to the LAN.
Sure. Is PPTP also valid for failover? Let's say that the VSAT fails and then they have to log on over the FBB.
Yes.
Again, we have.
Yes. So basically, yeah. So you can log in through either interface. And so, for example, on that demonstration that I did, we were on a vessel that had 2 fleet broadbands.
Yes.
I can do PPTP connections through either fleet broadband.
Okay, that's great. So what's the main advantage of having a 513 router on the office? Basically?
None. You don't need a 513 router in the office.
You don't need.
No, absolutely not. There's no need. We don't. I mean, we log into we have 513 routers here that we use for demo or whatever, but we don't have one hooked up in the office that is used to connect to the ships.
Yes, but when the customer needs to have, let's say that they want to get from us the service, whereby they pay, you know, a DID monthly fee. And
Okay,
a very low
yeah,
monthly
so what I would do is I would sell them a WXA 400.
Sorry?
I would sell them a WXA 400.
For the 400 for the office.
Yes, that's the cheapest VoIP router that we sell. It has no analog lines. It's just strictly SIP based, and then they can just use that and connect that to their PBX if they have a SIP based PBX. If they have an analog PBX, then they can buy a WXA 404, or they can buy a PAP2 and then just connect the PBX, their PBX to the PAP2 to the WXA 404 and route calls to the ships through the 404.
So they can, if they go for the WXA 400 for
Yes.
the office,
Yep,
they can connect it to their current PBX.
that is correct. And then just whenever, so for example, they might connect to the current PBA and they say all calls to the vessel, to dial a vessel, dial 99, and then the DID for the number for the vessel, and then that will route it through the WXA 404, and there will be no termination fees for that. So they'll have their
Sorry,
PBX.
can you-
Okay, so for example, we have two different voice services here in the office.
Okay.
If I dial plus country code and phone number, it goes through one provider. But if I dial 998 country code and phone number, it goes through a different provider. In the first case, it goes through VoIP. In the second case, it goes through our T1 telephone line.
I see.
And the reason, and the way we've done that is because we've programmed our PBX to recognize 998 as a prefix to route the call to a different location through a different telephone system. Well, they could do the same thing. They could program their PBX in the office so that when they dial, for example, 8 or when they dial 9, they would dial 9 and then the DID for the ship. Then the PBX would say, this number starts with a 9, therefore it needs to go through the 404, and then route that call through the 404. So they would have to program their PBX to do that, but they can certainly do that. Or they could have a 404 and then just use a SIP extension, and then just pick up the SIP extension whenever they call the ship.
Yeah, and that thing that they can talk free of charge between the vessel and the office, or the vessel and the vessel.
Yes.
In that case, the WXA 400 connected to the company's PBX can do the job, right?
That is correct. All they need to do is take a WXA 400 and put it on their internal network, and they're done.
Yeah, because if you remember, we talked last time.
Yeah.
They are thinking of putting of having minimum three IP phones on board each vessel.
Right.
And then they can have local extensions on the vessel.
That is correct.
And then they will have the router, one of the routers in their office, and somehow we make it that they have free calls between the vessel and the office.
That's correct. So you would put WX500s or WX513s on the vessel, and you would put a WXA 400 at the office.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, because you don't need the routing capability at the office. All you need is the VoIP capability.
Sure.
And
Okay,
then
that's fantastic.
yeah, and then they can make the calls. And so yeah, and now so the break even is about 1,000 minutes. If they're calling the vessel for more than 1,000 minutes, then this solution makes sense. If they're calling the vessel for less than 1,000 minutes, then it's just cheaper to pay for the postpaid calls through the PSTN.
Yeah, sure. Okay, this is okay. So we have to thank you very much for these explanations and everything around. It's been very guideful and very helpful. And we'll be in touch as always by the standard way over the email, and then we'll see again John in our new WebEx on Wednesday afternoon, as we discussed with John earlier on today.
Great. And so I will get you an activation key probably later today, so that you can go ahead and activate the VoIP unit this weekend, and then you can play with it. Now, when you activate the VoIP unit, you can just do this over a regular internet connection. You don't have to have it hooked up to satellite connection when you're just trying it out. you can just take the 513 and just plug it into your office router, into your LAN. Just take the, just plug the WAN port, the middle WAN port, which is the ETH1, which is the middle Ethernet port. Just plug it into your local LAN, and then just plug in a PC into the LAN port, which is ETH0, and then you can do everything as if you were doing it over VSAT. Except the latency is going to be a lot slower, of course, because you're going to be over an internet instead of over a VSAT connection.
Okay, that's fantastic. And can you also send us sometime later on today the link of today's WebEx so that we can?
What I'll do is I'll go ahead and turn that into an MOV, and then I'll upload it to the web, and then I'll send you an email with that as well.
That's great. That's fantastic. Many thanks for everything. Huh?
Okay, great, fantastic. Good luck.
So we'll be in touch, and very shortly in the next couple of days again.
Okay, sounds good.